From the ETS website, the TOEIC speaking and writing tests include tasks that people might perform in work-related situations or in familiar daily activities that are common across cultures. The tests assess English language speaking and writing proficiency and do not require candidates to have specialized knowledge of business. The speaking test responses are digitally recorded and sent to ETS's online scoring network, where they are scored by certified ETS raters. The speaking test tasks are timed, with time being given for preparation and then a specific amount of time to give a response. Now on the TOEIC, as mentioned in the previous video series, most of the content comes from these particular areas. Again, most of them kind of relating to business in many different ways. For example, general business terms, manufacturing, finance and budgeting, and so on. But then you'll also notice that some are related to kind of some of the secondary issues of business, such as travel, dining out, maybe with clients, perhaps even entertainment-related venues. So it's possible to see kind of a broad variety of things on the TOEIC. And of course on the TOEIC speaking section, as you will see, it is possible that you might see information from many of these different areas throughout. Now, all of the information that's being taken from the TOEIC speaking section is directly available from the TOEIC Speaking and Writing Examining Handbook. This is again produced by ETS. It's available for free from their website, and a link has been provided at the bottom here of the video of our YouTube channel. So again, a lot of the information and of course all of the questions that you will see in this series are from that particular handbook. Now, the test itself, since we're providing a kind of an overview here, the test does include 11 questions, and these questions measure sort of different aspects of your speaking ability. Now, the test only lasts about 20 minutes. However, there are a lot of things that you have to do on the test, so oftentimes those 20 minutes can feel very long. Now, in this particular video series, we're looking at the very first task, which is reading a text aloud. But let's take a moment to look at the other tasks, just kind of a brief fashion. The next video will talk about the describe a picture task on the test. The video after that will look at the next set of questions in terms of responding to questions. One will be just responding to questions in general, and then others will be responding to questions in which information is provided. So, for example, you'll have to read something and then answer questions about it. The last two particular videos, one will deal with the propose a solution, and the final one will be in expressing an opinion. So again, these are the descriptions of the tasks themselves, and based on the question numbers, that's how many of the questions you'll have to answer. So for today, there will actually be 2 tasks that you'll see on the test. We'll only be looking at one, but basically you'll be given 2 of them during the test. Now over on the right side, you will see are some evaluation criteria. We'll talk about those in just a moment. Now in terms of the organization, the tasks themselves are organized in order of complexity. So, for example, questions 1 and 2 are considered to be less difficult than questions 10 and 11, and so therefore are not worth as many points. So, as we said, we'll look at that evaluation criteria. What you will notice is, as you progress through each speaking task, you will notice that it will include the evaluation criteria from the task before it. Now, in the video we're looking at, the task we're looking at today, we'll focus on pronunciation, intonation, and stress. The next video will kind of only briefly reference the pronunciation, intonation, and stress, but then also look at the grammar, vocabulary, and cohesion dimensions that are involved in the next task. So the idea here is, as you progress through the test, they're going to be looking at all of the evaluation criteria, not only from the current task, but all of the ones before it. Now, in terms of how they evaluate on the test, it's a little bit different, of course. Since this is not an objective test, a multiple choice test, the evaluation criteria are actually measured in a holistic way. So each criterion on the test each specific area is evaluated as an overall appraisal. So notice instead of just focusing on counting how many errors you make, it's kind of just looking at it in kind of a global way. So that's what's meant by holistic. Now each criterion is measured from 0 to 3. 3 is the highest score and 0 of course the lowest. Now this is different for questions 10 and 11, which basically involve 0 to 5 as the scale. So, for example, when we talk about an individual criterion, let's look at the pronunciation criterion for a moment. Now, you will notice here that the scores themselves only come with kind of a response description. And this is going to be one of the challenges we're going to address throughout the video series. ETS doesn't necessarily provide a lot of information in their publicly available materials. So we kind of have to guess a lot as to what these particular scores mean. For example, pull out my pen tool here. 3, notice the key words that we have to identify. Highly intelligible. Now, highly intelligible basically means that we can understand you. It doesn't have to be perfect. Notice it says it may include some minor lapses or some minor language influence. But the key here is that it is something that we can understand. Now, obviously, if you're an international student, and you probably notice that speaking to different groups of people who might have different accents in English, sometimes you could be understood very well, sometimes not. So part of the challenge here is determining what does that mean, highly intelligible. Highly intelligible to whom? Well, obviously to the people who are evaluating your test. So this could, again, a tricky area to determine what exactly does that mean. A 2, of course, which is still a fairly good score. Notice it uses, again, still positive language. It's generally intelligible, though, again, it includes some lapses or other language influence. So really, the 3 and 2 scores are kind of the 2 positive scores that you can receive on this part of the test. Notice, though, that the language of the descriptors begin to change. It may be intelligible, but... So there's kind of our first negative word here in terms of determining what the descriptors mean. So in this case, notice it says its significant other language influences interferes with appropriate delivery. So at this point, once if you get below a 2, you're really looking at negative scores here. And then of course a 0, what I usually tell my students, a 0 means you were either dead or asleep. You basically gave nothing, or you gave a response that was completely unrelated to the task, or you even spoke in your own language. But to be perfectly honest, it's almost impossible not to get at least a 1. But you will see that, of course, it really does depend on the task as well. Now, we'll talk more about the intonation and stress criterion in just a moment, but this kind of gives you an introductory idea to what exactly we're talking about. One of the challenges in determining how well we do on this part of the test, or in any part of the speaking section. So as we said before, minor errors or infrequent errors will not completely hurt your score. The real emphasis here is not to be perfect, but to be understandable. And as we said before, there really isn't a lot of definition as to what other language influence means. Some students do have particular issues that are persistent. Pronunciations of certain sounds, for example, often make understanding very difficult. But I think it really will depend on what the specific criterion is being evaluated. So in this case, when we talk about pronunciation, in this particular activity, pronunciation is going to be very important. In the future activities, though, I think you will notice that your ability to express yourself will be more important than pronunciation. But for example, some students might have trouble with L's and R's or V's and W's. Again, if this is persistent and makes it difficult to understand the word, then generally that will affect your score. But again, that really depends on who's listening. Now, in terms of the scores themselves, the later tasks are worth more than the earlier ones. Now, this is actually very similar to the reading and listening sections. There are those particular tasks are also organized by levels of difficulty. But when you receive the results of your test, you won't see just these scores of 3 and so on. You'll actually see a particular scaled score as well. And we're not going to be talking about scale scores in this video, but the idea here is they will give you kind of descriptors as to what your proficiency level will be. Now let's actually begin to start talking about the actual test, and we're going to look now at questions 1 and 2, the reading task. Now again, all of this information is from that particular examining handbook. So this is what you will see on the on the screen or on the particular booklet, depending on where you're taking the test. But most of these particular tests are done now digitally, the speaking and writing sections. So on the screen, you'll have 45 seconds to prepare for this task, and then 45 seconds to read the text aloud. Now, we're not actually going to read the text at the moment, but I'm just going to show it to you here. First off, you will notice that it's not extremely long. It's probably around 120 words if you count from the beginning to end. So the first question is thinking about, well, what do I need to do? Obviously, reading a particular text seems like a fairly easy task, but the question is, what exactly are they looking for? And what are some particular things that we notice when we look at the text on the test? So as we said before, the evaluation criteria really focus on pronunciation, intonation, and stress. Now, we've talked a little bit about pronunciation. Let's talk a little bit about intonation and stress. So once again, we're using the same sort of scale, a 3 and a 2. So really the 3 and 2 scores are kind of the positive scores here. But then as you start to get into 1, notice we start seeing more negative language. But again, let's go back to the topic, because we obviously want to focus on the good scores. So again, emphasizing information, pausing, rising and following pitch, especially where appropriate to the text. So these are the kind of the general ideas for both the 3 and 2. We want to make sure that we understand what exactly they're looking for. Obviously, many students think about reading a text and think a lot about where do I pause or stop, but really one of the things they're looking for is the ability to sound expressive, as if you really understand what you're reading. That's a big thing here, especially on this part of the test. So again, we're talking about the general ideas of sentence intonation, so rising and falling pitch. If we do see any questions, thinking about the different intonations we see with yes or no or information questions. Again, general understandings of pitch. So where do we focus? Which words do we tend to emphasize? What happens if we were introducing new information? General, just syllable stress, getting down to the basic level of words. Where do we stress in a particular word or group of words? And of course, thinking about where do we generally stress in a sentence as well. All of these are kind of fundamental to the ideas of speaking and pronunciation in English. Now, speaking more on kind of a larger level, thinking about fluidity. How comfortable and fluid do we sound? Do we give pauses in appropriate places? Do we recognize punctuation in the right way? Not including any significant interruptions or lapses. So in other words, if we start stumbling over words, we don't want to spend a lot of time with kind of gaps or pauses. We want to keep going in a nice fluid way. We also want to think about where can we link sounds. Now again, I'm not spending a lot of time in this video talking about some of these pronunciation issues. There are a lot of great resources that you can refer to, but we will address some of them because I think that's important in the video. But for example, if we see things like going to and want to, we probably should not use the extreme reductions of gonna or wanna. Those are fairly informal, and I think the test is looking to see maybe some general linking ideas, but nothing too informal. And of course, really, I think what's important about intonation and stress is thinking about understanding things in the context of the reading. So recognizing the meaning of the words, and of course how they relate to each other. I think that's very important here. This is not just reading the words in front of us, but actually making it sound like we understand what we're reading. I think that's what the TOEIC is really looking for. Now, in terms of pronunciation, again, we think of pronunciation as kind of basic or elemental things, thinking about the sounds of English and the vowels and consonants themselves. We also think about the clarity in which we enunciate words and how fluently we do it. So again, that key, as we mentioned before, is we want to sound intelligible. We want to be understandable. So part of it is going to be how do all of these things play a part. And believe me, the TOEIC is trying to test all of these things. And we'll see that when we look a little more carefully at the text. Now, before we actually begin reading, I think an important thing to think about is looking at it from an elemental level. So let's start by talking about an important strategy of what happens when we do see some difficult words that might be difficult for us to pronounce. So sometimes in the text, you probably will see a word that's difficult. And again, this is by design. This is on purpose. When the TOEIC writes these particular test items, they are definitely there to try to trick you. Now, one of the first things I tell students is when you look at a text, think about the ideas that might give you difficulty. Now, we're starting in a very basic way here. So let's start focusing just on words themselves. So many times difficult words are those words that are long and have multi-syllables, or they might have problematic sounds. For example, if our Japanese students oftentimes have difficulty with the L's and the R's, our German students might have difficulty with W's and V's. The particular sounds that might give your particular linguistic background problems. So we're going to look at that first example, and we're going to see what words might give us some difficulty. Now, just for the sake of time, I've gone ahead and chosen the word spectacular, because oftentimes these particular words look very intimidating, especially if you've never seen it before. So let's use this as our example. Now, the idea here is when we see words that are difficult, the first thing we need to do is to know how to break them down into smaller chunks, into smaller parts. Well, the most natural way would probably be to start with the syllables of the word. So here, what I've done is I've taken spectacular and divided it up into its syllables, and you'll notice there are 4 of them. Now, as you look at these syllables, ask yourself these questions. Are they still too big for us? Are we still having difficulty when we try to pronounce the word? And thinking about, should we break them down into even smaller parts? Perhaps they're sounds or even just groups of sounds. This is not easy. Even for experienced students, many times they've forgotten the individual sounds or thinking about the exact way to break information down beyond the syllable level. Well, let's focus on the first syllable. Okay? So how could we break this down even further? Well, in this case, I'm going to break it down not just by each individual sound, but maybe how sounds group together in an easier way for me, like according to my ear. So what I have here is basically now kind of 3 groups of ideas. Some sounds and then some groups of sounds. Now, what we're going to try to do is pronounce each chunk separately, but slowly. We're not really trying to move it faster here at this moment. Now, again, we're talking about preparing here, so this is just teaching us a strategy that hopefully you'll become more comfortable with when you actually sit down and start preparing for the test. So pronounce each one slowly, but don't bring them together just yet. So let's try it. S, pe, k. Now we're going to bring them together slowly. Now, what I often tell students is try grouping them slowly, taking 2 of the chunks, either the first 2 or the last 2, whichever you think might be easier for you. Now, oftentimes students have difficulty when you have a blend with the letters S and P. So what I suggested is combining the last 2 chunks first. S, peck. That might be a little bit easier for us. Now, as we bring them together, notice how we're going to try it again very slowly. Speck, speck. Now, we're going to reincorporate these chunks back into the word. So notice how we're slowly going to bring them together. Spectacular. Now, the idea here is that we want to combine them in a way that seems natural. Just like we did with the individual sounds, now let's see if we can combine these chunks in a natural way. So, for example, I thought it might be easier to combine the 2 middle chunks. Spectacular. 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 Now, of course, the way I was pronouncing the word was not the actual finished product. We also have to be able to identify the stressed syllable. Now, if you can't recognize it immediately, then you may have to try all of them to see which one do you think is the stressed syllable. And remember, there are 4 of them in the original word. Now, something to keep in mind that in English, it's pretty rare that 3 or more syllable words would have a stress on the last syllable. Many Latin-based words also follow particular stress patterns. So, for example, it would probably not be common to have the stress syllable on the LAR part of the word. Now, where do you think the stress syllable is in this word? Well, if you said ta, spectacular, then you're correct. Now, the question, though, is how to make it sound natural. Well, one of the first things we need to remember is that syllable stress is not about how loud or soft the syllable is going to be. It's actually about how long or how short. So, in this case, what we're going to try to do is make the stress syllable longer than the other syllables. Now, you say, well, how can we do that without sounding kind of crazy? For example, am I going to say spectacular? Well, no. Actually, it can be done more easily by reducing the other syllables, making them shorter, and keeping ta clearer and basically unchanged. Now, here's a visual aid. This is one that I've used in other videos with pronunciation. And this is a technique I also use in class. And really, it's actually a technique I've kind of learned from one of the teaching books that we use. But notice I've divided it back up into syllables. But notice what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to use my hands to indicate. So I start with my hands together, and then I move my hands out to show how long the syllable is. So, for example, the first one, I want to keep the length of the syllable very short. So notice my hands are kind of short or close together. Spec, spec. Now you try it. Put your hands together, and then open your hands very quickly and try to say spec very quickly. Spec. Now look at the space between your hands. That is a short sound. Keep that syllable short. In the next one, move your hands farther apart. Ta, ta. So the idea is to make this particular syllable basically longer than this one. Or, in the opposite way of thinking, make this one shorter than this one. Now the next one is going to be actually a little bit longer than the first one, but not as short as the second one. And this happens a lot with words as they get longer in English. So if you have words of 4 syllables, 5, and so on, oftentimes you will have a second syllable stress here. But then notice the final syllable is also going to be short. So in other words, think of the first and fourth syllables as basically kind of the same length. Ta is a little bit longer, or is the longest, and Q is a little bit in the middle. Well, now let's hear it. Spectacular. So instead of saying lar, like I was at the beginning, now make it faster. Lur. Spectacular. So if you notice, by making spec and lur very short, and by making Q a little bit shorter, the ta starts to sound a lot stronger. Spectacular. So thinking about how we can indicate rhythm, it's better to think about rhythm in terms of how long or how short, not as to how loud or how soft, or how much emphasis we place. So remember, rhythm in English is not about just how loudly, it's about reducing the length of the other syllables. Now, as we mentioned before, that Q is a little bit longer. That's because with words that do have more than 3 syllables, we often see things called a secondary stress. So this one's going to sound a little bit more clear than the other syllables will. Now again, the idea here is that we're not trying to take the entire video to teach about pronunciation, but that particular strategy is helpful when we see words that are fairly long and difficult for us. Now, take just a moment, pause the video, and see if you can say these other tricky words. And think about our strategy. Try to break these particular words down into smaller parts. See if you can figure out where the stress syllable is. and then slowly bring that information together. Use your hands perhaps to indicate each syllable, which one is going to be longer and which ones are going to be shorter. So pause the video for a moment. When you come back, let's listen and I'll pronounce them for you. Okay, here we go. First, let's just listen. Incandescent. Incandescent. Deoxyribonucleic. Deoxyribonucleic. Philanthropist. Philanthropist. 55,333. 55,333. Lithesome. Lithesome. Tumultuous. Tumultuous. Incontrovertible. Incontrovertible. Lorraine. Lorraine. Now I chose some of these words because some of them have tricky sounds. Others have lots of syllables. Let's go through very quickly and identify the stress syllable. So in the first word, incandescent. This is the one you want to make longer. The others we want to make shorter. Incandescent. And can is probably going to be the secondary stress. The next word is a scientific word, and actually, since it's kind of a group of lots of different roots put together, this is one in which the stress is going to be controlled by the actual original word, nucleic. Nucleic. So even if you add more and more prefixes and so on before it, the stress is still going to be in the same place. So deoxyribonucleic. So even if you said ribonucleic or nucleic, the stress is going to be always in the same place. Philanthropist. Philanthropist. So notice this th sounds a little bit stronger. This would be the secondary. 55,333. So notice 1,000, which we can't see, is actually where the stress would be. 55,333. Lithesome on the first syllable. Tumultuous. Incontrovertible. Lorraine. Now, of course, this was just for a little exercise. Obviously, these words you probably would not see on the TOEIC. But the idea here is, when we practice words, sometimes they will throw a word that might be a little tricky for you. It's definitely helpful to think about that strategy. Break it down into smaller parts, build it back up together, and slowly identify the stress syllable and make sure that we can actually emphasize it so that it sounds a little more clear than the other syllables. Now, as I mentioned before, we're not going to spend a lot of time on pronunciation itself. There are a lot of great resources that are available, and you can find a link to our TOEFL TOEIC website, again, at the bottom of the screen, and you will see a lot of these recommended websites there as well. Now, just to go through these very quickly, a great YouTube video channel is Rachel's English. She focuses almost exclusively to teaching English pronunciation. So if you're not familiar with Rachel's English, I would highly recommend that you visit that video series. Now, on our own video channel, I put together a video last year. It was mainly for teachers, but you will find in the middle of the video we talk a lot about talking about pronunciation. So if you can find this video, it's called Words with Friends, Teaching Pronunciation, Literacy Skill, and Vocabulary in the Adult ESO Classroom. So I try to address a lot of sounds in that particular video and discuss, of course, the idea of rhythm. Now, on the web, again, there are a lot of great resources. The University of Iowa has an American English pronunciation website. It has basically like these computer animations to teach correct American English pronunciation. So again, it's a great website. I would recommend it. At our website, Kenton ESL, if you go to our educational websites, you'll find it on the right side of our screen. We do have a speaking and pronunciation website, which does contain the link to the Iowa website as well. But also, there are a lot of great learners' dictionaries online. Merriam-Webster has one, Longman Dictionary, but they also have the ability to pronounce or for you to listen to every word in their dictionaries. Dictionary.com is another great source. But you will find that most of them do include pronunciations, so that's often very helpful too when learning new words. Now, in terms of textbooks, the one that I'm using to kind of get some of the ideas for this presentation, Clear Speech by Judy Gilbert. Definitely one of the best pronunciation textbooks available. I would highly recommend, if you haven't already used her series, to purchase that book. It's a great source. Also, another computer program that I could recommend is Pronunciation Power. This is one that we've used in our program pretty much from the beginning. So for at least the last 12 or 13 years, this has been a program we've used a lot. But since we're now in the age of mobile devices, there are also two apps you might be interested in. First off, Clear Speech, the textbook, now has kind of a Clear Speech app. It has a lot of little games and activities that you can do to kind of focus on some pronunciation issues. And then Macmillan has also published a Sounds app that includes the pronunciation of the sounds in British and American English. So again, lots of great choices and opportunities out there for you to practice. Now, the next strategy we're going to be looking at is the concept of thought groups. Now, thought groups, which we're going to be abbreviating as TG, are ideas that are used primarily in spoken context to indicate to the listener how these words and ideas group, how they relate to each other. Now, we mentioned the word chunk before, so let's kind of talk about that. Thought groups are usually chunked together. They're usually chunked together by following common linking patterns, intonation patterns, and appropriate recognition of pauses. So we think about chunking. Now, chunking is something that we also use in the reading process when we start trying to identify how words work together. So we're going to discuss a little bit how chunking works in speaking. But really, the idea here is that it's a natural process. So in the beginning, students often have difficulty recognizing chunks, so they often look at each word individually. But you notice as you get more experience with speaking, reading, and so on, that you start noticing how words work together. That's really what chunking is about. Now, when we say thought groups really is an extremely broad category. So you notice we're going to break these down into many smaller categories. For example, the natural relationships that we see in a sentence. So, for example, collocations, subject-verb relationships, adjective-noun relationships, even prepositional phrases are kind of thought of in kind of as collocations. Idiomatic expressions, for example, the phrase "bite the bullet." We think of that as a thought group. These are words that belong together, and we need to find a way to say them together. Phrasal verbs, which are oftentimes thought as idiomatic, but phrases such as pick up, and then any other modifiers we might see or objects that follow it. Even when we have phrases that involve proper words, proper names, for example, like the Cincinnati History Museum. Notice in this case I emphasized the word history, but I made it sound as if it's kind of an idea that belongs together. I didn't put any pauses between any of the words. I tried to make them sound like they belong together. Now, punctuation often can indicate how ideas are grouped together. For example, commas are very important. So when I see this particular phrase here, this particular clause at the beginning of a sentence, while you are waiting, notice how my voice kind of changed a little bit, especially towards the end of the comma of the clause. That makes it sound like these ideas belong together. Quotation marks are often very helpful as well. Notice what I'm going to do here by putting a slight pause before and after the word nice. He's not what you call a nice person. Notice I tended to put a little more emphasis on the word nice. So basically anything inside of the quotation marks is thought of as a thought group. They kind of belong together. But actually all of this is kind of grouped together, call a nice person. So even then, the punctuation is telling me not only how to pronounce the word nice, but then also how to introduce it before and after, and how it fits together with nice person. Semicolons. Semicolons are kind of similar to periods or commas, but not as strong as a period, and certainly a little bit stronger than a comma. So listen to this. That's not what he said. However, So notice I try to give a little pause, but not a complete break. Now, of course, numbers, dates, phone numbers, and so on, they all have a certain rhythm or group idea. For example, when I give a date, notice the particular rhythmic idea I use. On Saturday, March 13th. So notice there's kind of an expectation. Saturday, March 13th. Notice I don't say Saturday, March 13th. I say Saturday, March. So notice how I kind of jump into March to kind of show that even though there's a comma there, they still somehow belong together. So that's especially true in English. The intonation, rhythm that we use, the pitch, and so on, these all work together to show how ideas are grouped together. Think about a phone number. How would you say this? Well, in American English, we would say 555, pause, 123, 4567. So notice even then I use a particular rhythm and group of intonation sounds and so on to make it sound like these ideas have a special relationship with each other. I didn't separate them completely. I used a particular rhythm, and of course if you've heard many phone numbers in English, you probably recognize that that's pretty much the same rhythmic pattern we use for all phone numbers. So as we mentioned before, English is a stress-timed or rhythm-based language. So the idea here is it's not just about the words, but it's actually the way we say them too. So thought groups, in a way, do help to reveal our true intentions by demonstrating just how both our words and our spoken delivery work together to help create meaning. Now let's demonstrate with an example of rising and falling intonation. As we have seen, generally we have a rising action before the end of a sentence and on the last important content word of the sentence. Then we end the sentence with a kind of a falling intonation. So for example, when I say my name is John, notice how I use intonation to indicate that John is the most important word. My name is John. So notice that John receives more of that rising action and then falls at the end because it's the end of the sentence. Now name gets a little bit of a rise because name is also an important word. But John is clearly the focus of the sentence. That's the idea of focus, is we're emphasizing the word John even more than the word name, and of course very much more than my and is. These two particular words are not really important at all in terms of our intonation. Now of course we need to say them, but we don't need to emphasize them. Now with other thought groups, we have to think about that intonation is extremely important. Thought groups can help to signal where important ideas are. Now, here's where we start talking more about the TOEIC. On the TOEIC, one of the most common thought groups is the series. The series is really when you have those three or more choices that are separated by commas. Now, notice in this example how the series thought group intonation curve will get kind of stretched out a little bit. So even though we have commas, the commas themselves are not going to pause in the same way that you would have if you just had one comma. Watch what happens. I visited the museum, the library, and the park. So notice museum and library basically receive kind of similar rises, but we don't exactly fall off at the end. Now this is pretty much true of commas, but because we have another idea here, and of course I was using kind of the Oxford comma here, the British comma, to help illustrate that the idea here is that we want to pause a little bit here too, but that we're also indicating that library and museum are kind of part of the same idea. Only at the end, when I reach the word park, do I put a little more emphasis and then completely fall. Now just listen to it again without the words. Listen and pay more attention to the sound, the intonation, how I rise and fall in the appropriate places. Da 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 da, da 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 da, da da da. So by thinking of this as one group, as one idea or unit, the thing here is that I'm showing you that there are pauses here. There are actually 3 items in the list, and that I should pay attention to each one, and that they all kind of belong together. So notice they're all basically the object of the verb visited. This is probably one of the most common thought groups you would see, you'll see on the TOEIC, especially involving punctuation. So these commas, in a way, help to extend the intonation curve. And then, of course, indicate that the word park, because I rose a little bit and then fell, that basically says, oh, this is the end of that list. So, of course, as the list gets longer, that intonation curve gets stretched out more and more and more. And, of course, it makes it more difficult to keep that higher pitch, because as we add more and more words, it's kind of more difficult to sustain. Now, try these examples. Many of these involve punctuation. Some are just groups of ideas. Pause the video for a moment and then see if you can pronounce them, and then when you come back, I'll read them for you. Okay, now I'll read them. Would you like cream or sugar? Would you like cream or sugar? We ordered soup, salad, coffee, and pie. We ordered soup, salad, coffee, and pie. Notice how that one gets stretched out a little bit more because now we have a fourth item. 415-668-6963. 415-668-6963. 5 minus 2 times 2 equals what? 5 minus 2 times 2 equals what? John said, "The boss is absent." John said, "The boss is absent." John, said the boss, is absent. John, said the boss, is absent. The dog chased a rabbit, but didn't catch it. The dog chased a rabbit, but didn't catch it. Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. The 50th Annual Academy Awards. The 50th Annual Academy Awards. Now, when we talk about linking and stress within a thought group, as we said before, it might be possible to link in many places. And linking is especially important with words, grouping words inside of a thought group together. For example, idiomatic expressions and phrasal verbs are commonly linked together because the words themselves work together to create a new or unique idea that the individual words themselves don't make clear. So, for example, in the phrasal verb put down, again, we're not translating put and down separately. They're actually working together. So notice oftentimes it's common to link or join the pronoun that separates the verb together with the verb. For example, put it down, we actually would say, especially in American English, put it down. Put it down. So, of course, when we think about stress, this is another idea that's common in a thought group. Which part do we actually stress? Now, since English rules of rhythm pretty much apply on the word level as they do on the sentence level, we have to think about where in this rhythmic group, this thought group, where is the stress going to be? Well, in this case, phrasal verbs usually stress on the preposition. So in this case, we would say, put it down. Put it down. So if you think about using your hands, when you kind of open your hands to indicate the stress, down you would open your hands more. Put it down. Put it down. Put would sound even shorter. Put it, put it. So notice put it, put it, put it down, put it down. That's part of the idea of linking and stress. So when we do see thought groups on the test, we probably need to think about linking a little bit. Now, when we think about idiomatic expressions, generally the content word receives the stress, which means that that last content word will receive the higher pitch. Also, we think about idioms are more likely to be linked together because, again, we want to show that these words belong together. Now, this was an expression I mentioned earlier. Notice how we're going to try to combine some of the sounds to make it sound like it's part of one idea. But then notice how intonation is also going to help in making it sound like a finished group. So first off, bite is going to receive a little bit of stress, and then bullet is going to receive a little bit of intonation, and then bullet's going to receive even more. The, on the other hand, you will probably notice, will almost sound like it's going to disappear. Bite the bullet. Bite the bullet. Now, this process is not linking, but it's a related concept called blending. Generally, we link consonants to vowel sounds, but we blend sounds that are especially very similar to each other. Well, in this case, the t at the end of bite and the voice th in the beginning of the are actually going to kind of blend together and make it kind of sound like one idea. So the key is to think about, don't actually finish the t sound. You're actually going to have it connect to the beginning of the th sound. So listen to it very slowly. Bite the, bite the, bite the, bite. So notice how I finish on the T, bite, but I don't stop it. I mean, I kind of end the first part on the T, but I don't finish the T. I don't say bite. I say bite the, bite the, bite the. So because the T and the TH sounds are similar, not exactly the same, but similar, we can actually blend them together. Bite the bullet. Bite the bullet. Now try some of these phrasal verbs and idiomatic expressions. Again, pause the video, you try them, and then when you come back, I'll say them for you. Okay? Let's start with the phrasal verbs. Keep it up. Keep it up. Watch out. Watch out. Put them down. Notice we cut the H. Notice we cut the H in this example. Put them, put them, put them down. This is called the disappearing H in pronunciation. Cut it out. Notice the exclamation point is going to help us emphasize out even more. Cut it out. Cut it out. So notice that T is going to sound more like a D sound in American English. Get something over with. Now here we've got two prepositions. Generally we would emphasize the first one. Get something over with. Okay, let's try the idiomatic expressions. History repeats itself. Notice repeat is the last content word. Keep in touch. Keep in touch. Make yourself comfortable. Make yourself comfortable. Change your mind. Change your mind. Or in this case, since it's a command, change your mind. We would probably drop a little more on the period. Okay, well, we spent a lot of time talking about a lot of the basics. Now let's actually go back to the reading and analyze it. Now, as we look at the reading, the key is to think about, how can we actually approach this in a systematic way? As you might recall at the beginning of the video, you really only have about 45 seconds to prepare before you speak. So the question, of course, is thinking about what's the best way to maximize the use of time. Now, as you're looking through this, the first thing to think about is, well, where could be the areas that might trick us? Well, first off, punctuation. Punctuation is often very tricky. And as we mentioned before, those series thought groups can be very tricky. So, for example, if you notice, we have a series right at the beginning. There's an example of a series. Do we see another one in the passage? Take a moment and look. We do. It's here in the third line, continuing into the fourth. Now, what other punctuation marks might give us a trick? Well, this is something we'll look at in a moment. But let's just focus on these two. All right? So I'm going to say them. You can repeat after me. If you're shopping, sightseeing, and running around every minute. So notice this is where the accent's going to be. This is the end of the group. If you're shopping, sightseeing, and running around every minute, let's try the next one. With its spacious rooms, swimming pool, spacious rooms, swimming pool, and many outdoor activities. So notice we're going to rise on activities and then fall a little bit. So here are some examples of where punctuation as a series definitely will influence how we pronounce ideas in this reading passage. Now, what other punctuation-related thought groups do we see? Well, once again, we see a lot of commas separating one part of a sentence from another. Here's one. Here's another. Any other punctuation? Well, of course, we've got periods. No question marks. But we do have a quotation, or a quote, rather, at the end. Now the key is to think about what are we going to do at these particular junctures. Well, let's try this last part. Your vacation can seem like hard work. Work. Notice we're going to rise and then fall at the period. Now what are we going to do here at this comma? To avoid vacation stress, so notice again, we're not going to fall quite a bit. Again, this is kind of referred to as a hesitation. We use hesitations, of course we use them up here with shopping, sightseeing, and so on, to help kind of stretch out the intonation because it helps us understand that something is coming next. That these two ideas, the first part of the sentence and the second, are actually connected. To avoid vacation stress, then notice here at the end, Lake Mead. Mead. Then we'll fall. Let's try the next one. Staying at our inn, so there's that hesitation again. And then at the end, spectacular sights. Okay, again, we mentioned the intonations issues here with the series, but then notice a vacation you won't forget. Won't is probably going to be emphasized a little bit more because being a negative word, it's probably going to be the word we need to focus on. It's not that you will forget it, you won't forget it. And then it prides itself to every guest. Now, how are we going to do the quotations? Well, again, this whole idea needs to be treated differently from the rest of the sentence. So first you'll notice we'll pause a little bit here. And then we'll go into the actual quote itself. The Blue Valley motto has always been, pause, a happy guest is our greatest treasure. Now here is a good example of what we also might consider a rhythmic unit. Part of the idea is I'm separating here. Now we'll talk about this in a moment, but happy guest is considered kind of a thought group idea. Happy is defining the word guest, and generally we would take a pause before we get to the next verb. We could kind of connect them if we wanted to, but it might seem a little bit better since happy and guest are a thought group itself. A happy guest is our greatest treasure. So the idea here is that greatest treasure would also be perhaps thought of as a particular group. So again, you might see lots of opportunities for these kind of rhythmic divisions as well. So punctuation is very helpful. But there are of course going to be other thought groups as well. On the TOEIC, again, the most common will usually involve those proper names and those collocations. Now we looked at one collocation already, happy guest. We also saw another one here with greatest treasure. Now let's go back to the beginning and see if we can find other ideas that kind of go together. For example, running around. If you're running around every minute, notice these particular words seem to kind of go together. Your vacation can seem like hard work. So again, your vacation can seem like. So again, notice how I'm kind of dividing these into those rhythmic units because these words seem to belong together. Now, I don't pause as much here as I do at a comma. Your vacation can seem, like hard work. We could even divide here if we like. We could connect the noun of vacation to can seem. We could even connect like hard work. Like, of course, is a preposition, and hard work is the object of the preposition. Notice in the next one, to avoid vacation stress. So again, vacation stress is going to sound like it kind of goes together. But now here comes our first kind of proper name. The Blue Valley Inn on beautiful Lake Mead. So notice beautiful is going to kind of work together. But Lake Mead is also going to work together because it's a proper name. On beautiful Lake Mead. Where are some other places we can kind of group things together? Well, for example, we've got clean country air. You'll breathe clean country air as you view spectacular sights. There's another one, an adjective describing a noun. Now, of course, in our series, we may have some other rhythmic ideas too, with its spacious rooms, swimming pool, so no swimming is going to get the accent there, and many outdoor activities. The inn is the perfect place for a vacation you won't forget. So notice for a vacation, that prepositional phrase is going to be thought of as a group. The Blue Valley Inn prides itself on the personal attention it provides to every guest. So again, we might want to think about putting the personal attention it provides to every guest. The Blue Valley motto has always been, so again, this might be thought of as a rhythmic idea. And as we said before, a happy guest is our greatest treasure. So notice here in step 2, we're now kind of thinking about what other ways we can group information. And we could also think about rhythmically, where would that rhythmic break take? Because we don't want to make the sentence sound too long. But really, you'll find that most of these can be defined by the thought groups they make. Vacation can seem like hard work. Can seem. Now, you could say, my vacation can seem like hard work. You certainly can put them together a little bit more quickly, but this might help you kind of slow things down a little bit at the beginning to recognize these ideas, and again, give you time during that 45 seconds to maybe practice a couple of ideas very quickly. And then finally, step 3, which is actually kind of the last step here, instead of the first one as mentioned at the beginning of the video, try to identify any difficult words or groups of words. Now, the TOEIC loves to include ideas that pose problems for students, especially confusing the L and R sounds, and perhaps voiced and voiceless TH sounds. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time analyzing them, but notice in this particular sentence, we have 2 words here that begin with the letter S. We have 3 words here that kind of, in fact, there's one at the end here, the L's and the R's that might cause trouble for students. So again, especially for students who might speak Japanese, oftentimes it's hard because we often switch between the L and the R sounds. But again, notice in many ways how they're trying to challenge us by using these kind of, we call this alliteration, spectacular sights. It begins both with the same letter or same sound. Here we've got that you'll breathe clean country air. Again, the R's and the L's there can try to trick us. So again, oftentimes you need to kind of focus on those because the TOEIC loves to throw these things in. Now, before we actually go, finish up by reading the entire passage, the one other little hint I like to give students, and that is to think about getting in the spirit of the actual reading. Again, we don't want to sound like a robot. So the key is to think about that these tasks themselves are often, coming from advertisements or commercials, announcements, and so on. So in my opinion, I think in order to perform better on this kind of task, I think it's more helpful to encourage students to actually get into the spirit. So in other words, if it's supposed to be an advertisement for a relaxing vacation spot, I like to tell students, make it sound like an announcer for a relaxing vacation spot. So, as we get ready to actually read through the text, how can we sound nice and relaxed? How can we sound nice and prepared? Well, I think one problem students have is they think that 45 seconds is not enough time. So they try to read it as fast as possible. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need to think about how to read it in a nice, natural way. You see, in my opinion, I do think that 45 seconds is plenty of time. This is not a race. Obviously, it's good to try to finish in 45 seconds, but I believe the TOEIC is listening for, can you read it in a natural, relaxed way? Now, I'm going to demonstrate here by reading the text. In the bottom of the corner, I'll have a clock, and this clock will indicate how much time has passed. And notice how when I read it, I'm going to try to use an appropriate announcer voice. Okay, now get ready and follow along as I read through. And you'll notice that I take quite a bit of time, but I do finish within 45 seconds. So let's listen. If you're shopping, sightseeing, and running around every minute, your vacation can seem like hard work. To avoid vacation stress, come to the Blue Valley Inn on beautiful Lake Mead. While staying at our inn, you'll breathe clean country air as you view spectacular sights. With its spacious rooms, swimming pool, and many outdoor activities, the inn is the perfect place for a vacation you won't forget. The Blue Valley Inn prides itself on the personal attention it provides to every guest. The Blue Valley motto has always been, "A happy guest is our greatest treasure." So now at this point, thinking about when we're preparing for the test and thinking about how we can evaluate ourselves, let's go back just for a moment and discuss what they're looking for. Remember the key criteria: pronunciation, intonation, and stress. So as we said before, we want to sound highly intelligible, which means, I think, in often cases, not going too fast. Many times students are so nervous, they read so quickly, this is where they make lots of mistakes, even mistakes in words that they already know how to pronounce. Now, intonation and stress, in my opinion, is probably a little bit more important than the pronunciation issue. We want to make sure that we really do emphasize those pauses and rising and falling pitch and so on, especially in those appropriate places in the text. So as we said before, we need to remember that individual small errors will not completely hurt your score. The emphasis really is on being understandable, not perfect. Now, we talked about before, we don't know necessarily what other language influence means. Obviously, it could refer to those particular criteria that are being evaluated, but most likely it's probably involving problematic sounds, or, in my opinion, oftentimes students from other countries don't have the same kind of strong intonation or that kind of up and down feeling that we have in English. Many times students speak in a very flat way. So this could also be what they mean by other language influence. Now, the first thing to think about is, as we're preparing and practicing, but of course as we're taking the test, what happens if we make a mistake? Well, in my opinion here, trying to correct yourself would probably be a bad idea. So in this case, keep going. The more you try to go back and correct, you'll probably become more nervous as you continue. So if you do make a mistake or struggle with a particular part of the reading, just move on to the next part. Move on to the next word. I know, of course, that's easier said than done. So really, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that you need to be ultimately confident by practicing a lot before you actually get to the test. Now, how is this possible? Well, I believe the key here is you need to practice recording yourself. The best way to prepare for this part of the test, or any of the speaking sections, will be recording yourself. Because first off, that gets you into the same mindset that you'll use on the test. Now, for this particular part of the test, you're usually looking at readings of around 100 to 120 words. They're usually short advertisements, announcements, especially from newspapers and magazines. So when you're practicing, let's talk in general and then we'll get more specific, but I usually recommend students try to record themselves probably around 4 to 5 times for each passage. Now that doesn't mean you should read them 4 straight times. The idea is you need a systematic approach, and this will help you become more aware of your issues. So please don't record yourself 4 times in a row. So here are some steps to follow. Step 1. Record yourself the first time after analyzing the text. Just relax. So again, 45 seconds, a minute. Just look at it and then relax. Record yourself. Now, step 2, listen to that first recording, but then have the text in front of you and start to try to identify where your issues may be. So think about it for a moment. Did you mispronounce any words or any parts of words? Then circle those. Circle the words or the parts that you had where you had difficulty. Also, did you pay attention to punctuation? Did you use that proper intonation or give the appropriate pauses? Okay, now step 3, before you record yourself, practice them again, especially those particular ideas. Don't just read the whole text, just practice those issues again. And take some time and rehearse before you record yourself. Okay, once you feel ready, record yourself again. This time, read the passage maybe a little bit more slowly. Don't worry about 45 seconds or a minute. In fact, don't even pay attention to time at all. Just read it and concentrate on getting it correct. In my opinion, most students go too fast the first time. So try to be more aware of your reading and then try to slow it down. So, repeat the process a couple times. But again, don't focus on time. Focus on how to express the ideas in the text. Focus on being more correct, really, instead of being fast. Most likely you will become more and more familiar and understand the text better, and you'll begin to sound more natural, which in turn will help you read a little bit faster. Again, it's not important to finish in 35 seconds. You've got the whole 45 seconds, so use them. Even if you read and you get cut off on the last word, don't worry about that. Now, I think it's even better if you can record yourself after you've listened to a native speaker read the same passage. And in fact, you can even read along with the native speaker. That would be even better. So there are some good websites where you can listen to a text and read the transcript at the same time. One that I like to use is called Voice of America. And there is a website, there's a part to the website that's very much dedicated to teaching English. You can listen to every story they have and read along with the transcript. Now, of course, these are not advertisements or commercials or so on. These are news articles, but they're kind of simplified a little bit for English students. And, of course, the stories are longer than 120 words, but you can maybe take one paragraph and practice reading. Again, if you're focusing more on British English, the BBC has a Learning English website, which is very similar to Voice of America, where you can listen and follow along with transcripts. And, of course, one other thing you might want to think about is YouTube. You know, YouTube has lots of TV and radio commercials. So many of the TOEIC tasks are similar to these things, and I think YouTube does have some examples. And, of course, some are great, some are not so great, and be careful. Obviously, there may be some that are not appropriate. But I think it's a wonderful resource where you can repeat and repeat and repeat over and over again, and even practice reading along with the video. So our final thoughts in this first video, and this is something I'm going to stress really throughout the entire video series. It's really more important to be understandable than it is to be fast, especially at the beginning, especially when you're beginning your practice. Even though you won't know the exact text you'll see on the test, the TOEIC is not going to surprise you. You will see many of the ideas that we discussed in this video throughout this section. So try to practice those as much as possible. As we said before, like the series, you're going to see that a lot on the TOEIC. And then finally, 45 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to read is plenty of time for this section of the test, but not necessarily for you right now. Right now, the only way you'll be able to achieve this is through lots of practice. So again, at the beginning, don't focus so much on time. But keep in mind that, in my opinion, 45 seconds for both of these is appropriate. But you're not ready yet. You've got to practice in order to get to that point. Now, there are a lot of also great recommended prep materials, and one that I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to really emphasize. The official TOEIC website is great because there are lots of other helpful products that you can buy. But in my opinion, the thing that you need the most, almost as much for the listening and reading, but perhaps even more, is the Grant True textbook, Tactics for TOEIC, the Speaking and Writing textbook. Because in my opinion, one of the difficulties is that we don't actually know what exactly ETS is looking for. So in this case, the nice thing about this textbook is it does include actual examples from test takers. And it even gives you how they were evaluated or scored. That's extremely helpful because otherwise ETS does not provide a lot of information for us. So if you do have to buy a textbook to prepare for this part of the test, I would really recommend this Tactics for TOEIC textbook from Oxford University Press by Grant True. And again, I have all of this information listed also at our TOEFL and TOEIC preparation website, which can be found, the link can be found at the bottom of the video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for video 2, Describe a Picture.